the time thought that sounded like an interesting idea. We had no idea what it would mean or what would come of it. But year after year, we would send some money. And then after a few years, it kind of evolved. And they decided, well, if Good Shepherd's going to continue to do this, then we better get some organization. And they asked each of their congregations, there were 11 congregations in this parish, it's a widespread rural parish, to select their most destitute orphan families to become Good Shepherd orphans. And so then we had official Good Shepherd orphans. And it has grown since that time. And Good Shepherd has been wonderful about staying committed to these children, bringing them up from primary school all the way through now till we have several who are in college and university, because the point would be to give them a skill that they can be self-sufficient with. They may have to leave Zimbabwe to find work because the economy is in rugged shape right now again. But at least we will have seen them to a point where we feel like they can sustain themselves and perhaps sustain others. It's been a wonderful journey, but now it's getting to be a more expensive one, and we need more friends. Because we have 45 children in the program, 43 of them are currently in school, a couple of them have opted out as teenagers will do. You know, they have minds of their own, and you can't, you know, just like you can't make your own kids do everything you want them to do. Well, you know, some of them aren't going to do what we wish they would. But we have stayed with all of them. There are some who are good students, some who struggle, but we are committed to each one of them as ours. And it's been a wonderful journey watching them grow. So that's how it began and how it has grown. And now we are welcoming other friends to join us. We made our first trip there in 2010. And the children were all very silent, because in that culture you don't speak to an adult unless you're spoken to. And so they were very uncomfortable speaking to us. We tried to break that barrier by making them give us a hug every time we parted, because we said that's the way our culture works. You know, parents hug their children. And it started to break the ice a little bit, so that when we went back in 2012, they were ready to talk a little more and to hug a little bit. In 2011, we were asked to consider putting some of those children in boarding school, the ones who had to walk so far to school that they were up before daylight and home after dark, and then still studying by candlelight. And so we did that. And then when we went again in 2012, we saw such a huge change in their growth, in their health, in their how they felt about themselves. And you know, it was just wonderful. And they were beginning to have a community where they knew each other as the Good Shepherd orphans. It was giving them a belonging that they really seemed to need and enjoy. On our last trip in 2015, we went to visit all the rural schools. And our hearts were just aching, you hated to go, to see all the need that the schools have for supplies and things. The government is barely paying the teachers at all anymore, and yet they are all so dedicated. And then to know that 70% of the children in those schools are orphans, and they are all asking, how do we get into the Good Shepherd program? And what we are doing there in Zimbabwe is unique. There are not other church groups doing this kind of thing. They may be helping a little here and there, but they have not committed like we did to a group, staying with them, seeing them through. And so we have a reputation about how wonderful this program is. So I wanted to tell you about how wonderful their growth is going. Now that we have some students who are in university and they have to have laptops because there are not textbooks available, so they do all of their work pretty much online, we are getting communication that we could never have before, and it's been wonderful. And their English has improved so much as they've gotten older too, so now they can, you know, speak and write, some of them very clearly. And we're hoping that someday we're going to be able to, our dream is to be able to bring a couple of those students over here so that we can enjoy them and, you know, everybody can get to know them, not just those few of us who make the trips. But there are families at Good Shepherd who write. Every child who has been in the program has at least one family, most of them two, that write to them regularly. The child knows who they are, knows that they are prayed for every day, knows that they are cared for. And they know that when we go, they recognize that we are Good Shepherd. Even if we're not the one writing to them, they say, please, give this love to my parents at Good Shepherd. They feel this as a real thing that they can depend on. It fills a hole that they have in them and keeps them moving and growing and being responsive to the program and to staying in school. It's been a very successful program. Not one that we planned. God did it. We now have a house in a mining town where a bunch of our orphans are together, those who passed O-levels but didn't have quite enough points to go on to A-level and need to improve their O-level skills, and some of our slowest learners are staying together in a home with one of the women in the program. And that was something we hadn't planned either, but it seems to be working well as a kind of like a halfway house for this step in life. There always seem to be new developments happening. What else did I want to say? Issues. There are some issues. One is that young women are very vulnerable for marriage and or for pregnancy, because at 14, 15 in that rural culture, it's considered marriageable age. And so they're always being approached. That's a need for really serious counseling that we, of course, from here cannot provide, but can see the need for. Have tried again and again to be able to make that happen, and there have been a few instances where we've had like a workshop or so forth that was worked out for them, but we still see that as an issue and a real need for these young people. We have an issue of just counseling for life skills, because they've grown up in the rural countryside. When they do go to post-secondary education, it's a big cultural change for them. They're not really been counseled and given, a transition, and that we see as a real need too. We're hearing about when they've come to this house in the mining town where there are appliances because there is electricity, which they of course never had at home. They don't know that you have to keep the refrigerator door closed, for instance. Things that we take for granted. They have never had a flush toilet, and they haven't been prepared. But of course, it's expanding their world enormously. The other issues are larger than that. There's persistent drought. This has been an ongoing problem ever since the beginning of this program. The country doesn't get rained on enough. That makes subsistence farming, which is how most of them survive in those villages, difficult, to say the least. There is the issue of a government that has really raped the country and doesn't care about its citizens. And so an economy that is not going to sustain their lives very well, they are probably going to have to go to neighboring countries for good work. We can't fix that. And currently now there will be another election coming, and so there is also always the fear and the threat that it might not be a peaceful process. We're hoping and praying that it won't interfere with us going next year in the first 2 weeks of July. That is our plan. And so, that's the story. And I'll let Kristen take over from here because her husband Tim was supposed to be next.
It was his idea. He's the golfer. He made me promise. He's flat on his back with back spasms, and he made me promise. It's got a little short, and then we're gonna have the drawing. And I just want to remind people too, or note, we have some takeaway cupcakes from dessert, so please take 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 4 with you as you go. But I'm going to do Tim's little speech, and then we're going to do the drawing. So he worked on this really hard. He was really changed. I had to convince him to go, and he thought, well, what am I going to do here? But he was really changed. So good evening, and thank all of you for joining us tonight for this very important occasion. I would like to briefly tell you about our experience. A little more than a year ago, when we paid a visit to the people of Zimbabwe and the orphans of Menene Parish. It started with a very long day of travel, flying from Raleigh to New York, and from New York to Johannesburg, and from Johannesburg to Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. Peggy, my wife Kristen, me, and myself were met by Bishop Moyo and his wife Iris, and also by Reward Gumbo. He was the young man my wife and I personally sponsored, who was the first of the sponsored orphans to attend college, and also the first to receive an attachment or internship. This was special, but the trip was to become more special indeed, and have a profound impact on the way I saw life, priorities, perspective, and God. After visiting with the Moyas for a day or two and collecting more goods to take to the children, their schools, and to the people who housed them, we set off to Menene Parish, roughly a 2.5-hour drive into deep rural, mountainous, southern sections of the country. We were to stay on the grounds of a small community hospital located on the edge of the village, along with a tiny nursing school. We met the people in charge of the compound, and we unpacked into our guest hut, which in truth was better than I expected. He told me he thought we were going to stay in tents the whole time. Even though each night before I would lay down, I would sweep away cockroaches, silverfish, and spiders from my bed. And this is from a man who hates spiders. At least I had a bed. We had electricity too, although temporary, because it would be turned off each night fairly early. We also had water, although when it came out of a faucet, it was mostly greenish-brown, bluish color. Soon we were able to meet the children that our church has been sponsoring for years. Kids that in most cases grew up without beds, running water, or electricity. Kids that had to walk to school each day over rough terrain and in tremendous heat. Kids that truly knew what hunger was. And finally, children who grew up without the love of a mother or father, many times the parents dying from AIDS. Over the next several days, we would throw the kids a large birthday party, giving them gifts donated by the church families, visiting their homesteads, donating day-to-day supplies to the ladies, mostly older widows, who had offered to take them in, and visiting their schools, where we were allowed to give out school supplies, soccer balls, and Bibles to the faculty. And that was something that really impacted Tim. He brought his own money to buy Bibles, and a lot of the principals were very, very grateful for that. We were also allowed to speak to the children in mass about our backgrounds, the importance of school and work, and how we can balance the challenges of daily life in all the forms it takes with God's will for our lives. So what did I learn from this incredible experience? From my humble perspective, I learned that this life is much more than about me. I learned that even in their poverty, the light of God still shines in the eyes of a child, even if they're half a world away from us. I learned that when you step outside of your comfort zone and help those in need that you may have never previously thought about before, you will learn more about yourself than you ever thought possible. I learned that God considers visiting orphans and widows in their distress while keeping yourself unsustained by the world is in his eyes pure and undefiled religion. And finally, I learned that those of us who humble ourselves before God and come to the foot of the cross in total redemption become brothers and sisters in Christ, regardless of location, regardless of race, regardless of wealth, and regardless of what others think of them. God sees and he judges perfectly. Each of us here tonight have been given a special gift by God in order to serve him first and others next for our good and his glory. I would ask now that each of you search your hearts to determine what God has given you and how in kind you would use your gifts to make a difference in the life of a child.